please remember to leave a like, a comment, share the video about, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Thank you. Well, isn't this just fantastic? On YouTube, there have been many creators over the many years of its existence that have incurred the ire of a community or a number of communities. Those creators have, for ill or for good, continued to push their message, a message that might seem either contradictory, negative, or perhaps it was born out of ill intent to push an idea that many were not welcome to, because it inherently was bad. The creator we're going to talk about today was involved heavily within the anti-SJW, SJW, feminist, anti-feminist communities, mostly on the side of feminist and social justice warrior, somebody who rose to prominence more notably because the anti-SJWs and the anti-feminists responded to almost every single video they created. This person in question was dubbed a trans-trender because many believed they were not real, that their identity was false, and that they would only do things to appear more like they were transitioning for the sake of it, rather than because they actually were it. There were contradictory messages that certainly did not help this. So the point of today's video is to talk about what that person tried to achieve when they were active, where it is they plateaued, and what happened after they plateaued. Many of you will not have heard of this creator because they have not been active for quite some time. But for those that do, or were kicking around the time of the vaunted anti-SJWs and anti-feminists, many of whom were called skeptic clones, you will know this person as Riley Dennis. And that is the person we are going to be discussing today. So to start this video off, I'd like to talk about how they came about and how they rose to notoriety. Earlier in the introduction, I mentioned Riley Dennis rose to notoriety and/or fame, success, acclaim during the time of the vaunted skeptic clones. I was considered one of those back then. Hi, hope you're all having a smashing day. Hence that cringy little cue thing. I've been holding onto it for years. Riley Dennis rose to notoriety because response videos were incredibly popular then. It was a format that was very easy to put together. It was very easy to respond to, cherry pick, quote mine, and when you were someone like Riley Dennis, who put out very, very scripted content, every point seemed to be loaded with fallacies, straw men, would gaslight to no end. The video that really got them off, the one that really set them on the path to, well, what they became, more of a lolcow than someone that could be taken seriously, was a video concerning dating preferences. Now this video is no longer on the Riley J. Dennis YouTube channel, but it was responded to by so many creators. Some were not the skeptic clone varieties. You had people like Ariella Scarcella replying to this, you had Blair White, you had Repsion. These people responded to the video because even if you took one sentence and responded to it, the sentence on its own was disingenuous, false equating race, false equating disability, and that with those who are transgender. The format of video that Riley Dennis made would be sat in front of a camera with occasional cue cards provided on screen to back up with some form of empirical data. This data though was often flawed. This video was, as I said, responded to by everyone, but it became the first of many videos that were responded to by the anti-feminist, anti-SJW communities. Not just because it was easy content, but because it didn't seem to bother Riley Dennis the sheer vast amount of backlash that they received for their poor ideas. And that is what they were certainly considered to be back then. Many of the videos that were responded to though no longer exist on YouTube because Riley Dennis removed them at a certain point in the future. I'm just not sure when. Other creators around this time received a considerable amount of attention that I'm considering doing a video on as well would include the likes of Milo Stewart, who did at some point collaborate with Riley Dennis. That too did not go down very well. It can be argued there was a level of dogpiling going on during this time, because there were 10 to 20 channels at any one point responding to what Riley was producing, the same with Milo Stewart. There were calls, because of the vast amount of criticism they received, that perhaps they should receive an apology. A debate can certainly be had on whether or not an apology is owed to someone like Riley Dennis, Milo Stewart, and any other creator that vast amounts of content were produced based on because of how it was handled at the time, but that's a hindsight thing. Some people even managed to hash out their disagreements at places like VidCon to then get stabbed at the back at another opportunity. But that is a massive distraction from Riley Dennis, who we are going to be focusing on. So what kind of channel, what kind of content did Riley Dennis produce? Riley Dennis is a transgender female that produced content specifically covering society and progressive ideas. The intention being, I assume from that of Riley Dennis's mind, to be to present an argument that perhaps society was not as far well evolved as it liked to think it was. Talking about the empowering nature of feminism, the toxic masculinity, how dating preferences are in and of itself bigoted or against a certain group, depending on who you will not or will date, how it could be argued to be transphobic, which is what many believe the argument was presented by Riley Dennis in those videos. Talking about body standards, beauty standards, faith, the importance of debate to an extent, not joking by the way, how social media can be damaging to your health, and how to fix the Democratic Party, something which to this day has not been fixed. I do believe I've covered what the format was. I think what we should do now is, if I can find them, play relevant clips of some of the greatest hits that have come from Riley Dennis. I've just got to find them first. This is going to be a ball ache, isn't it?
Would you date someone who's trans?
No.
Would you date someone who's black?
Maybe.
Would you date someone who's fat?
No.
Would you date someone who's disabled?
No.
I've met a surprising number of people who...
And hold on a second. I'm down to respond to this video, but I have to do something really quick just to make it a little bit easier for myself. Much better.
I've met a surprising number of people who would say no to all, or at least some of them. Their argument is that it's just a preference and that you can't control who you're attracted to. Well, if you said no, I'm sorry, but that's pretty discriminatory. I'm not saying you're a horrible person who hates trans people. There was probably a time in my life when I said I wouldn't date a trans person. Since then, I've thought critically about it and changed my mind. I could sit here and show you photos of conventionally attractive trans people. There are definitely trans people who you would never know are trans unless they told you, because they pass for cis. And that might convince some of you. But I think arguing that you would only like a trans person if you didn't know they were trans is a poor argument. Because we associate penises with men and vaginas with women, some people think they could never date a trans man with a vagina or a trans woman with a penis. But I think that people are more than their genitals. I think that you could feel attraction to someone without knowing what's between their legs. And if you were to say that you're only attracted to people with vaginas or people with penises, it really feels like you're reducing people just to their genitals. You're kind of objectifying them, but you're thinking of them more as genitals than objects. So I guess you're kind of genitalifying them. If you met someone who was extremely attractive, had a great personality, but didn't have the genitals that you wanted, you might be surprised to find that it isn't a deal breaker. But you can unlearn your own prejudices. It just takes time and conscious effort. And the way that we talk about potentially dating trans people has a lot in common with the way we discuss other preferences. Saying that you're not attracted to fat people isn't innate. It's informed by a society that tells you that being thin is ideal. Everything in the media you consume is bombarding you with messages that skinny is beautiful and fat is ugly. Now, if you're not attracted to someone, you're not attracted to them. I'm not going to tell you that you have to be attracted to this fat person or that trans person or that disabled person. But the more you work at unlearning your own prejudices...
Yes, I had to use a Blair White video because the original one is nowhere to be found. One of the main reasons I do believe that Riley Dennis removed a lot of the older content is because after all those accusations of being a transgender, Riley Dennis went under the knife to have facial feminization. A lot of the older videos had the older Riley in them, the one that many said was still just Justin Dennis. We're not going to use that name going forward here because I don't need that kind of crap in my life. So subsequent videos I'm now going to show you come from videos after those surgeries.
Netflix has a new original show coming out in August called Insatiable, and they just released the trailer, and it looks awful. The fat suit. The trailer starts off with a thin actress wearing a fat suit. That's just insulting right off the bat. I've seen tons of fat people on Twitter talking about how fat suits just make them really uncomfortable, and I think that's totally fair.
I've seen dozens of fat people on Twitter Interesting choice of words.
Fat suits make a mockery of actual fat people's bodies, and I can't believe a show thinks it's actually okay to use one as a central plot point in 2018. The reason we're talking about this is because recently some conservative asshole on the internet demanded that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez debate him. He even offered her a $10,000 campaign contribution if she accepted. So she never responded to that conservative asshole's offer. Her job isn't to argue with trolls who will most definitely make bad faith arguments. Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about what it means to be offended. Because depending where you are on the political spectrum, when you hear this word, there's a good chance you think of people on the left being offended, possibly by things you find trivial or nonsensical. And there's a reason so many people have this association with the word offended. It's because people on the right for a long time have been using it to insult people on the left. So much so that its meaning as a way to insult liberals and leftists has kind of seeped into the mainstream. For a long time, Democrats have been trying to win elections by appealing to centrists, to people who are undecided between voting for a Democrat or a Republican. This has pushed the Democratic Party to the center as they clamor for centrist votes. Meanwhile, the Republican Party has been moving further and further to the right, winning elections by galvanizing the most far right among them. This has led the entirety of American politics to lean to the right. Republicans win most of the elections, and then Democrats spend all their time trying to play nice with the Republicans so that they can continue to win centrist votes and not be seen as obstructionists.
Factually, the vast majority of Riley Dennis's political content could not have been more wrong. It really couldn't have. It came from a very progressive lens of, I'm very far left, so I can only see it this way. It was best demonstrated in one of many videos made by Blair White, debunking, and it really was a case of debunking, things like claims concerning a migrant caravan. The level of political naivety displayed by Riley Dennis explains something about their future that was only confirmed when I went to Riley Dennis's now wife's Instagram account. But I'm not going to skip ahead just yet. I want to talk about the downward part of Riley Dennis's time on YouTube before we get to the where are they now part. One of the reasons that Riley Dennis moved away and leant more towards politics was because the loaded, baity content made before that got the attention of the anti-SJWs and the anti-feminists, the skeptic clones, had dried up. The skeptic clones had fallen off, not least because after VidCon, they had started infighting, because as was successfully predicted by another creator who is no longer on this platform called Mim Headroom, once the bedroom feminists had been vanquished, defeated, they would have no enemy to turn to, so they would start fighting themselves. Many of whom were themselves grifters and only interested in making as much money as possible, so they dropped off, they quit, they left, they rebranded, some carried on. Riley Dennis's content became less interesting, so switching to politics to push a message that they believed in, being more left-leaning and progressive, did gain some traction, yes, but the views were nowhere near as good as they were during the times of the anti-SJW and the anti-feminist videos. Because response videos as a format also fell off, people were less inclined to go to Riley's channel. Some had apologized to Riley for doing so many videos responding to Riley, or perhaps presenting arguments in bad faith. I do believe Riley Dennis received at least one apology from Blair White. As more and more time went by, the politics also didn't really go so well. At that time in 2018, Donald Trump was in office. Many people felt that he was untouchable. YouTube as a sphere became very interesting for censorship, many on the right believing that they were being targeted for shermination and extermination. Riley, as you saw in a clip, believed actually it's the other way round, and that the left was constantly under attack. As that content also dried up though, Riley switched to a few vlogs, but then switched entirely to talk about Legends of Tomorrow, Legend of Korra, while also vlogging as well, speaking about the Hunger Games, speaking about The Mandalorian, The 100. The last video put out by Riley Dennis was on the 27th of September 2021 concerning She-Ra. Since then, no content has been seen on that channel. On Riley Dennis's Twitter, they have not been active since 2022, where they spent most of their time retweeting other people. Neon Fiona, though, had been active. I also should add now that Riley Dennis's Instagram hasn't really been active since June of 2020. So Neon Fiona was one of the very few outlets where we saw anything really going on with Riley Dennis. And to be honest, we knew nothing about what Riley had been up to, up until about a month and a half ago at time of recording, when Riley Dennis resurfaced, which was then corroborated by Fiona's Instagram. So where are they now? On the 6th of April 2023, the exhibition of Stupid People number 239. I covered this, and I'm going to play that clip now because I didn't believe that this was what had actually happened. In fact, I still struggled to really believe it until I checked Neon Fiona's Instagram and saw pictures of them together, because they're now married, but also pictures of them in Australia. This is important because I was struggling a little to believe that Riley Dennis had moved all the way to Australia, possibly because of politics, but also to live a very different life. Bearing, Riley Dennis, ladies and gentlemen, known for such works as Your Dating Preferences Are Transphobic. Thousands of complaints filed after trans YouTuber allowed to play on Women's Football League reportedly injures players, written by Redux. Now, underneath, many have said, is this an April Fool's joke? In fact, so many have written that. But Bearing is adamant this is not an April Fool's joke. Now, Riley Dennis I was considering doing an essay-like video on, because Riley hasn't been active for years. To show how Riley rose to notoriety, maintained a form of relevancy, solely built on the backs of being hated, to then just vanish in 2020, is to me quite interesting, because Riley Dennis really did vanish. Nothing posted to Twitter, Instagram, YouTube for years. And that's quite impressive to simply sever ties, when all you receive is negativity and you foster that environment, but all your messages are pointless now because you've said everything that needed to be said. Where do you go? In the case of Riley Dennis, the attempt was to try and make an alternative format of content. It didn't work, so Riley sodded off. There are two other tweets I want to quickly look at. The first is by Shay. Riley J. Dennis is back. He has taken a break from telling lesbians if they don't date him they're transphobic and is now injuring women on a football team. And Dennis was a bit ahead of the curve with the genital preferences of transphobic shit. He got hate back then, but if he said it now he'd probably get a senior position at Stonewall. Redux, the article poster, had written, a male trans activist and YouTuber has been participating in women's football in Australia, prompting over 12,000 complaints to Football New South Wales. Riley Dennis reportedly left multiple female players injured at a match last weekend. This was tweeted on April the 1st. Do you not see how we find this a bit sus? Also, YouTuber? Not posted since 2020. Not even a joke. I know this because I was putting a video together. I stopped because I couldn't be asked. And also I don't think it'd be worth it. There aren't many subjects I think I could do well doing anymore. But let's look at your article. An Australian amateur football league is receiving backlash from parents and players who are voicing frustrations after learning that a man who identifies as a woman has been dominating the female soccer league and injuring female players. New South Wales League 1 reportedly has 5 trans-identified male players, but one player has led the first grade goal kickers table with 7 goals. The Daily Mail in Australia has chosen not to identify the player, censoring images of him and declined to provide his name. Redux confirmed the player is trans activist Riley J. Dennis. I left out the YouTuber, see it on the article there? Nah, not since 2020. What doesn't help this, what really doesn't help, is that the article there mentions further down the team Inter Lions FC, right, and Football New South Wales scrubbing Dennis from their website. I went there and found out that yes, Inter Lions FC, the player name, is scrubbed and replaced with Inter Player. This does not help me. When I went to the Inter Lions FC Facebook, Instagram, I looked around. I couldn't find Riley Dennis mentioned anywhere. Hello everyone, Future Meg here. Just a quick thing, I was busy archiving stuff, yeah? Well, through Wayback Machine, I actually found Riley Dennis's name mentioned directly in the leaderboard. Just thought I'd insert this now as a Future Meg thing because I'd actually hit render on the video and then went to go and archive the stats leaderboards, and bosh, there it is. Back to your regular programming. The credibility is shot because apparently a form of scorched earth may well have been applied to a player, but we don't know who, just a player. This is where my efforts to try and find out whether something is true or not are for naught. What does help say that this might be Riley Dennis is that the Daily Mail Australia article uses a picture of Riley Dennis. That is straight up Riley Dennis because you have the uncensored version taken from Riley J. Dennis's Instagram account, taken in Thailand. This then brings up the discussion of whether or not those who are trans should compete in sports for the gender they identify with as opposed to the gender they were born, or biological sex if you're that person. If the injuries are true, and the advantages are clearly there, say this is actually definitively 100% the case, the question then becomes, based on what we now know, the goals, the injuries, should Riley Dennis be allowed to compete? And that's a question for all of you, by the way. We're going to treat this article as if it is and is not simultaneously. It is Schrodinger's article, okay, because of the time of the year it is released. It is far too sus for me to be certain. But there are aspects of this that really cause some confusion, don't they? If this is indeed what Riley Dennis now does, well done, I guess. Yeah, sure. I'm sure you're treated with marginally more respect in Australia than you ever were back home, wherever that was. We obviously here wish you well in your future endeavours. Yes, please don't injure people though, if it is you. Thanks. As far as video content goes, not many people actually discuss this. And we do since have confirmation that that is in fact Riley Dennis playing football, which is concerning. This discussion about inclusivity when it comes to male to female trans women competing in biological women's sports is going to persist for quite some time. But it is fascinating to see where Riley has gone since leaving YouTube, basically the internet as a whole. I am considering doing more of these kinds of videos talking about other people that were discussed during the time when I started on YouTube, especially the likes of Milo Stewart, Quick Kid Stuff, who I never spoke of on this channel, and many others who were given an absolute bollocking, a pasting by some communities that no longer exist. If that's something that would intrigue you, let me know in the comments down below. Oh, and just before we leave, years ago Riley Dennis released their own merch that said there are more than 2 genders, only available in men's and women's. Just thought I'd put that there, it tickled everyone to no end.